With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Gimel. We began the Masechta by speaking about three machloikas and three arguments between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel regarding Yom Tov, in which Beis Shammai, who is normally the more stringent one, Beis Shammai here is the lenient one, and Beis Hillel is the stringent one. And the first machloikas was regarding a egg, a beitzah, or as some people pronounced, a beya, that was laid on Yom Tov. Question is whether you can handle / eat it or not. And here Beis Shammai, again, is the lenient one, that you can eat it, which means you obviously are allowed to handle it, to move it. And Beis Hillel is the stringent opinion that says that you may not eat it, and as we spoke out, it also means you also may not handle it. And we are towards the end of the four different approaches how to explain that machlokes. We had yesterday in the beginning of the Masechta on Daf Beis the shita of Rav Nachman that says that the issue is one of muktzah / noilad. It only came into the world on Yom Tov itself. It wasn't set to be used for Yom Tov. And yes, similar to the general machloikas by muktzah between the Tanoim, Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda has a more broad application of muktzah. He's more stringent when it comes to muktzah, versus Rab Shimon that has a much narrower application of muktzah. That is the machloikas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. We had the second approach is the shita of Rabbah, and this is known as hachana de Rabbah, the rule of preparation of Rabbah, that food that's going to be eaten on any holy day, whether it's on Yom Tov, whether it's on Shabbos, needs to have been prepared beforehand meaning not on that day itself, and not on the prior day that's holy, but dafka on a weekday, on an ordinary day. Prepared meaning not cooked. Prepared means that one has to have had that food designated for it to be consumed on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. And that is a biblical obligation. And since, as we explained, an egg that's going to be born on any given day, it means that it was fully readied in the mother the day prior. So if Yom Tov falls out on Sunday, similarly, if Shabbos falls out on the day after Yom Tov, there's a Yom Tov on Friday, which means that this egg was fully prepared the day prior on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. In that scenario, this egg may not be consumed. And now, Gezerah, we extend and we say that no matter when Yom Tov is, even if Yom Tov is not on Sunday, and similarly Shabbos, even if Friday was not the Yom Tov, you may never have that egg on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. The third approach was the approach of Rabbi Yosef, which is where we left off. And he says that biblically the egg may be consumed, but there is a decree, a rabbinic gezerah, mishum peiros hanoishnim, if a fruit falls off by itself from a tree, rabbinically that fruit may not be consumed, because the Chachamim were afraid that you might go and take it off yourself. Taking off a fruit off a tree is of a biblical violation, and this is not considered a double decree, a fence around the fence, as the Gemara concluded that kula chad gezerah. In other words, this decree regarding the egg is subsumed, it's included in the one decree that they made, and that's the egg coming out of the mother, coming out of the hen, is similar to a fruit falling off the tree, that rabbinically it may not be consumed. And today we're going to take off on that Gimel Amud Aleph, the third line from the top of the Amid. The fourth approach was the shita, which is the shita of Rabbi Yitzchak, which says something very similar to Rabbi Yosef, agreeing that we're speaking about a rabbinic decree. The problem is of a rabbinic nature, and we're not saying that this is gezerah mishum peiros haneisharim, but we are saying that this is a decree mishum mashkin shezavu, which is similar. That if you have a fruit and liquid or left the fruit by itself, not that you squeeze the fruit. Squeezing a fruit in most cases is going to be prohibited under the malacha of dash. So the din is that those liquids may not be consumed, because Chazal said if you're going to drink it, you might end up squeezing it yourself. So we're going to view the egg, mamash, the same concept. It's not a decree to a decree. Mishum Peiros hanisharim, and the Gemara is going to explain why some of these Amoraim did not use the approach of the other. We're going to go from there into the introducing, at least now, the argument regarding how do we view the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Do we view them like the Tana Reb Yehuda, that they are shtei kedushos? In other words, that they are considered 2 days of doubtful holiness? Since we don't know which day is Rosh Chodesh, each day is viewed as a doubt by itself, versus the other approach, which will hold that regarding Rosh Hashanah, we consider them one single extended period of holiness, midrabanan. And there's huge consequences whether we consider both of these days like one extended day versus whether we say, of course, you have to keep 2 days Rosh Hashanah, but each one is its own doubt, and there are many consequences as we will learn. We're going to learn a little bit more about Muktzah. One of the rules we learned in Shabbos, which is the sheet of Rabbi Yitzchak, that ein kli nitel elo l'davar hanitel b'Shabbos, that you can't move a keli that otherwise would not be Muktzah. But you may not move it if you are moving it only for a muktzah item. However, we will learn the exception regarding muktzah, that once muktzah is already in your hand, then you can keep on moving it at your convenience. And how that's going to relate to our sugya over here. And on Daf Gimel Amid Beis, we're going to at least learn some rules about bittul, some rules about nullification. Generally, things are nullified halachically, whether they are nullified in a majority, bittul beroiv, whether they are nullified in 60, a ratio of 1 in 60, whether they're nullified 1 in 100, whether they're nullified in 1 in 200, but at some point things are nullified, but there are exceptions. For example, davar sheyesh le matirin. If you have an object that will become permitted. So since it's going to become permitted anyways, why do you have to rely on nullification? It won't be nullified, and then when it's permitted, the whole mixture will be permitted as well. There's another rule regarding nullifications, that if something is halachically deemed as chashuv, as significant, something significant is never nullified. What deems something significant? So one of the rules is kol shedarkei limanos, or es shedarkei limanos, which means an item that's either kol shedarkei limanos, typically sold as an individual unit. The fact that you sell it by its individual unit, that makes it significant chashiv. There are some that say that if it's only typically sold by its unit, but there are times that it's sold by approximation, it's not enough for it to be considered significant. This concept is only when it's es shedarkei limanos, something that's exclusively only sold as counted as a unit. The great example will be eggs. Eggs are normally sold by unit. Normally, a dozen eggs. But there are times that they are sold by approximation. A large box of eggs. Question is, do we view an egg as a davar chashuv? Thus, it will not be nullified or not, and much, and a lot more. Again, we left off on Gimel Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the top of the Amid. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol nivadvari. I do want to go back to one point, that in the third approach, which was Rav Yosef at the end of Daf Beis Amud Beis, that explains the stringent opinion. We're focusing obviously on Beis Hillel, that the egg that was laid on Yontif may not be eaten, may not even be handled, moved, is a rabbinic decree because of Peiros Hanoi Shaden, because it's similar to fruits that fell off a tree. And Tosfos here, the first Tosfos on the Amud, doesn't understand when it comes to Yom Tiv, what's the issue with fruits that fell off a tree? Why did the sages say you may not eat it? Because you might take it off yourself. So what? Don't we know that on Yom Tiv, if it's about food items, we may, there's no violation. We cook on Yom Tiv, we can shecht on Yom Tiv. You're taking a fruit off the tree. Why should that not be included in the heter of Oichel Nefesh? So Tosfos, 3 lines all the way under Rashi, the second to last line in Tosfos, or the 2 lines under Rashi, says, Perush Rabbeinu Nisanel Mikinoin, quoting from the Yerushalmi, that the verse that we have from where we learn that if it's food related, we can do whatever we need to do on Yom Tiv, and that's based on a pasuk that we find in Parshas Beit regarding the Korban Pesach, that Ach Asher Yehi Ochel L'Chol Nefesh, and the pasuk writes later, Ushmartem Es HaMatzos, we have to guard the matzos, not allowing them to become chametz. So he quotes Rabbeinu Nasanel from the Yerushalmi that what type of food preparation is permitted to be done on Yom Tiv? Only from kneading onwards. What's the magic of kneading? Because when do you have to guard the flour and the mortar not becoming chametz? Only when you mix them together, when you start kneading them. From that point on, anything that you do is going to be permitted on Yom Tov. But any other of the malachas, as it relates to the sidure de pas, remember in Shabbos we had the 7 steps that you need to make bread. Anything prior to that may not be done on Yom Tov, and that includes picking fruits off trees. Okay, so in the Gemara, 3rd line from the top, it's the 4th and the final approach. Rav Yitzchak Amar, similar to Rav Yosef, but not the same. That the problem, the challenge, the reason why this egg, according to Beis Hillel, may not be eaten, may not even be handled. It's true, it's only a rabbinic rule. It's a gezerah, it's a decree, but mishum mashkim shezavu. In other words, it resembles juice that flowed out of the fruit on its own, by itself on Yom Tov, which is also prohibited rabbinically, because if you would be allowed to drink that juice, then you might end up squeezing the juice out of the fruit, and in most cases that will be in violation of the Av of Dosh. Amar Abaye, mamash like we had before. I don't understand. How can you say that? Mashkin shezavu, even if you focus on liquids, juices that flowed themselves out of fruits. Tamamai, why did the sages say that you may not consume it on that day? It's only because Gezerah Shema Yischait, because you might squeeze it yourself. Well, that's only a rabbinic. He go for Gezerah. That in itself is only a decree. We're going to make a fence around the fence. We're going to make a Gezerah around the Gezerah. We know we normally don't do that. Again, answers the Gemara. No, it's considered Kula Chada Gezerah. In other words, that when the Sanhedrin convened and they made this rabbinic Gezerah, that if juice flows out of a fruit on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, it may not be consumed. You have to wait until the next day. You have to wait until after the holy day. Together in that, subsumed in that decree, was an egg that was laid on Yom Tov, similar to juices that flowed out of a fruit, may not be consumed on that day. So we have Rav Nachman, Rabba, Rav Yosef, and Rav Yitzchak. Now the Gemara wants to understand, why didn't everyone kuluk at Rav Nachman lo yomri? Why didn't they explain that the issue in our Mishnah is connected to Noilad, Muktzah? And the reason is Ki Kushion, like we pointed out, the kasha we had yesterday. And that is, that if the issue is about Muktzah, why did the Mishnah only focus on the Beitzah? Why didn't we also focus on the mother, on the hen itself? Same thing is about the hen. And the Mishnah, with very few words, could have shared both he Beitzah, the fact that the Mishnah did not mention anything about the mother, about the hen, that's why they rejected the approach of Rav Nachman. Similarly, why didn't the 3 Amoraim subscribe to the approach of Rabba? Because not everyone agrees, not everyone holds that the pshat and the pasuk that Rabba quoted, was coming to teach you this biblical rule that every food that's going to be consumed on Shabbos, every food that's going to be consumed on Yom Tov, needed to be prepared or designated on an ordinary day, on a choil day, prior that it's going to be consumed on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. Not everyone agrees to that. However, the question is, regarding these final 2 approaches, whether we consider the egg similar to fruits that fell off the tree, or whether we consider the egg similar to juices that flowed out of the fruit. Why didn't one say like the other? He'll tell you that's easy. He'll tell you that Beitzah is uchla. An egg is food. Peiros are food. They are similar. However, lafuke mashkin, when it comes to juices, the lav uchlu. Mashkin is not food, mashkin is liquid. So it's not similar to the gzeira of mashkin shazavu. Now, so how do you explain Rabbi Yitzchak? That Rabbi Yitzchak will tell you, "My tamala amakir Rabbi Yosef amarlach." No, an egg is similar to liquid. How? Beitzah balua. An egg is absorbed. Where is the egg is absorbed? In the hen, prior to it coming forth, and then it's issued forth. While it's in the source, it's completely invisible. You don't see it. It's swallowed there. Mamish like juices. Mashkin are balloon. when the liquids are in the fruit, you don't see the liquids. La'afuke peiros, fruits on a tree, even before they are picked or plucked or harvested off, the miglu v'kaimu, they are already exposed, they are already revealed. How great is that? In other words, when you are comparing one thing to the other, are you looking at what it is, or are you looking as how does it relate to its source? What a Hasidic concept. And actually, when it comes to us relating in the source, what we would hope is that the moment we become aware of our source, which is God and godliness, we are completely batel. Being revealed, even connected to the source, is not such a positive thing. So in this sense, the egg, which is so batel that it's balua, beautiful, in the source is taka like mashkin. And b'chlal mashkin, that's the whole word of mashkin. Mashkin, liquids. Liquids represent alma diskasya. Liquids bring about tahara, right? Liquids express a much higher level of godliness. There's a greater amount of union, right? The little droplets, they unite, unlike the grains or the granules of earth, that they remain separated, v'chulei, v'chulei. Okay. Now says the Gemara, now that we have these four approaches, our other Amoraim, even though they did not explicitly opine how they understood our Mishnah, but the great Rebbe Yochanan, obviously, says the Gemara, he understood that the issue of our Mishnah, the reason behind Beis Hillel, was because Gezeira Mishum Mashkin Shezavu, as taught by Rebbe Yitzchak, as we learned today. How do we know that? We know that from a different issue. Because the Rabbi Yochanan, Rami, the Rabbi Yehuda, he brought out a contradiction. We'll see soon Mishnayos in between Rabbi Yehuda in one place and Rabbi Yehuda in another place. And Mishane, and he gave an answer. And from that contradiction, and from the answer he gave, it will become clear that Rabbi Yochanan understands our Mishnah, as does Rabbi Yitzchak, that the reason why a Beitzah that is nolda b'yamtav, according to Beis Hillel, may not be eaten, may not even be handled, it's because of a rabbinic decree. It's similar, it was included in the decree that one may not consume juices that flowed by themselves out of a fruit, because you might end up squeezing it. Even though it's not shayach by an egg, but it's similar to, and therefore it was, like we said, it was subsumed into that one decree. What was the contradiction that Rabbi Yochanan pointed out? Because Tanan says in a Mishnah, Chavra Mishnah in Shabbos, Ein soichatenas apeiros, one may not squeeze fruits on Shabbos. Lohoitzi mehen mashkin, to remove juices. And as we said, that's because it's included in the Av Malacha of Dash, of Disha. However, if they float out by themselves, so even though they are not prohibited by biblical law, but like we just learned rabbinically, they are asurim, they are prohibited, because if they would be permitted, then people might end up squeezing the juice, the fruits themselves. And this decree will deter people. Anyways, what comes out is going to be prohibited. No one is going to end up squeezing it themselves. Okay, and Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it depends. If the fruits were picked off the trees, or now they are designated by their owners for consumption, not for it to be made into juice, not for it to be squeezed, so then Rabbi Yehuda says there's no reason to make a decree. Hayoytze mehen mutar. No prohibition was violated, you did not squeeze it. What are you telling me? Rabbinically, don't consume the liquid because you might end up squeezing the fruit. No, you won't. If before Shabbos already, you already had designated these fruits for consumption to eat them, you don't want to squeeze them. You don't want to make these oranges into orange juice. You want to eat oranges. However, if the fruits were designated for juices, then Rabbi Yehuda agrees to the Chachamim, right? Because Rabbi Yehuda is more lenient, he limits the area of the Gezeira. Says Rabbi Yochanan, concludes Rabbi Yochanan, Alma, we see that according to the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda, Kol Oichalin, if something was designated for food, according to Rabbi Yehuda, then anything that goes out from it is called Uchla de Ifrasu. We had that word yesterday. Uchla de Ifras means it's considered food that's separated from food. Right? If you have a steak, if you have any piece of food prior to Shabbos, you're not going to say that if we cut off a piece, unoilad. No, it's part of the food. Oy bazoi, and he says Says Rabbi Yechanan, if that is the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, I have a problem. Because for Oidam Rabbi Yehuda, now this is another Mishnah, but this is not a Mishnah on Shabbos. This is the Mishnah in Eruvin, and this Mishnah is speaking about how one views both days of Rosh Hashanah, which are kept as 2 holy days. And the 2 options are, like we mentioned in the intro, do we consider both days as shtei kedushos? In other words, they're 2 days of doubtful holiness. Each day is maybe today is Rosh Hashanah. The other day is maybe it's today Rosh Hashanah. It's called 2 kedushos. Versus the Chachamim, not Rabbi Yehuda, that consider both days of Rosh Hashanah kedusha achas. They consider it one single extended period of holiness midrabanan. Of course, min haTorah it's a 1-day Yom Tov, but since we don't know which day is Rosh Chodesh, so the Chachamim said it's considered one extended day. Now, where does that argument express itself? L'may nafkamina. So the first case over there in Eruvin is regarding Eruvei Tchumen, without recapping the whole din. But if I want to walk beyond the 2,000 amas, I can be koine shvisa at a different location other than where I am physically, and that placement of Eruvei Tchumen only works for that one day. When I place Eruvei Tchumen prior to the first day of Rosh Hashanah in one location, am I allowed to place another Eruv Tchumen in another location for the second day? According to Rabbi Yehuda, yes, you can, because each day is considered a standalone day. Shtei kedushos. According to the Chachamim, you may not. It's considered one single day, and on one day you can only place an Eruv Tchumen in one location. And let's leave it at that. And now what the quote here is from the other din that Rabbi Yehuda said. Another consequence of him viewing 2 days of Rosh Hashanah as Shtei kedushos, and that is, we know that if you have untithed produce, by rabbinic law, you may not tithe it, not on Shabbos, not on Yom Tov. What happens if you have a basket of produce and it's on first day Rosh Hashanah? Says Rabbi Yehuda, I have a solution here. What you do is that you physically separate what needs to be separated, and you say like this, that if today is really the holy day, what I'm doing now is nothing. I'm just taking out a couple of pieces of fruit, but I'm not fixing it by tithing it, I'm not tithing it. If today is the weekday, then this is Truma, that's Meiser, etc. And you know what? You do exactly the same thing the second day Rosh Hashanah with the same fruits. You don't separate other fruits. And now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, on the second day you can eat the remaining fruits in the basket. Because mimanav shach, you separated Trumas u'Meiseres, not violating Yom Tov. You didn't do it on Yom Tov. According to the Chachamim, you can't do that, because since they view both days Rosh Hashanah as one single extension of rabbinic holiness, you can't midrabanan separate Trumas u'Meiseres on Yom Tov. Let's read it inside. A person is allowed to stipulate regarding this basket of untithed produce. On the first day, Yom Tov Rishon, this is Rosh Hashanah, guys. And you say, like we mentioned, this is the Truma, that's the Meiser. All of this is only to be tithed if today is not holy. And on the second day, you repeat the same mantra on the same fruits, and you can eat it on the second day. Now, obviously, you can't eat it on the first day, because it could be the first day is Taka, the real Rosh Hashanah, it's the real Rosh Chodesh. And therefore, you said yourself that if today is a holy day, my separation is not being made to begin with. And similarly says Rabbi Yehuda there in the Mishnah in Eruvin, Beitzah shenol b'rishon, that if an egg was laid on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, says Rabbi Yehuda, for the same logic, you are allowed to eat it and certainly handle it on the second day. Same logic. Because mimanav shach, if the first day Rosh Hashanah was Taka, the holy day, we said this in the Mishnah, the whole stringent opinion of Beis Hillel is only for that day. This egg does not remain prohibited forever. It's only asur on Yom Tov. If the first day was holy, the second day is not. If the second day is Yom Tov, then this egg was laid before Yom Tov. So mimanav shach, you can have it on the second day. So asks the Gemara, says Rabbi Yechanan, I got a problem now, bishitas Rabbi Yehuda. I mean, Rabbi Yehuda clearly is saying that only b'sheni in. In other words, on the first day, obviously Rabbi Yehuda is following the sheet of Beis Hillel, you may not eat it. Why may you not eat it? Why? Now, guys, I know that this question only is a question if, and indeed, Rabbi Yechanan understood Beis Hillel as taught today by Rabbi Yitzchak, it's because of Mashkin Shezavu. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan had a problem. He says, hold on. The whole problem is that an egg is like juices that flowed out of the mother. But 1 second. Since the mother was designated to be eaten, guys, that was the whole Gemara. Just to repeat that detail. If the mother was designated to lay eggs, then you got yourself a muktzah problem. And you should know that even though muktzah is considered a rabbinic decree, muktzah is a quasi-biblical. It's a very high rabbinic decree. It's much more chamor than the typical gezerah. No, but obviously Rabbi Yochanan understood that no, it can't be. The mother was designated to be eaten. If the mother was designated to be eaten, so there's no muktzah issue. But since the egg came out of the mother, the Rabbi Yehuda says himself in Shabbos that food that comes from food is considered food, and that includes liquids. Liquids that comes from a fruit that was designated for eating is considered food. There is no decree, so it doesn't make sense. So now you got yourself a problem. Why would the egg, according to Rabbi Yehuda, be prohibited based on the premise that the mother was designated to be eaten? Based on the premise that the problem in Beitzah Shenolda B'Yom Tov is because Mashkin Shezavu, didn't Rabbi Yehuda say in the Mishnah and Shabbos that Mashkin Shezavu, if it came out of a fruit that was designated to be eaten, we say Uchla de Ifrasu. And that problem led Rabbi Yochanan to do that which we try to avoid, Umeshane Rabbi Yochanan, that Muchlefes Hashita. Wow, that the Mishnah in Shabbos got it wrong. That Rabbi Yehuda was the stringent opinion. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says that liquids that leave a juice by themselves, that they flow out of a fruit, always is prohibited. It was the Chachamim that said, it depends what the fruit was designated for. So says the Gemara, the fact that there was such a contradiction. Obviously, if Rabbi Yochanan would have understood Shitas Beis Hillel, which is the Shita that the egg may not be eaten on the first day, in any of the other ways, then he wouldn't have had that problem. Shma Mino, that he holds exactly like Rabbi Yitzchak, the issue is because of Mashkin Shezavu, and that's the whole problem. And the case of the Mishnah, again, it's not because of Muktzah. The mother was designated to be eaten, the hen was designated to be eaten. So taka, we have a contradiction. Now, this contradiction is, now we'll see on Amud Beis, we're going to have two other ways of resolving the stira between Shitas Rabbi Yehuda from the Mishnah in Shabbos versus the Mishnah in Eruv and Daf Gimel Amud Beis. Ravina Omar, no, loy teipach. Don't reverse the opinion in the first Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda is the lenient opinion. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says that if juices flow out by themselves from a fruit on Shabbos, you can't say asur midrabanan. You have to first determine what was that fruit designated for by the owner prior to Shabbos, and if it was designated to be eaten, then there is no gezerah. The reason why Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah in Eruvin, which basically is saying like our Beis Hillel, that you may not eat the egg on the first day, right? Rabbi Yehuda l'divrayim derabanan ka'amar lahum, which is lididi fakert. I really hold that this egg may even be eaten on the first day, and you know why exactly? Because Tapshat in the Mishnah is like Rabbi Yitzchak taught us, it's a gezerah because of Mashkin Shezavu. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that since the hen was designated for food, everything, it will consider the egg like liquid. Liquid that leaves food is considered a part of the food. And there is no decree that will not allow us to eat it. Uchla de ifrasu. Don't forget that the whole Mishnah over there in Eruvin is really based on this argument whether Rosh Hashanah is considered two Kedushos or it's considered Kedusha Achas. So what the Rabbi Yehuda is telling the Chachamim that liditchu, you prohibit the egg, right? And the Chachamim, by the way, they prohibit the egg even on the second day. Even on the second day. So he says, listen, on the first day I'm not going to debate with you, but at least admit to me that the B'Sheni, that on the second day the egg should be permitted. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying that because since it's 2 days of doubtful Kedusha, like I said, Mimonavshach, let an egg that's laid on Yom Tov always be Yasser. But it's only if it's laid on Yom Tov, and it's only Yasser on Yom Tov. On the next day it's not Yasser. So if the egg was laid, right, on the first day, it should automatically become permitted to be consumed on the second day. Because if the first day was Yom Tov, the second day is not. So it's the day after Yom Tov. If the second day is Rosh Hashanah, then it was laid the day prior. An egg that's laid out of Yom Tov is allowed to be eaten. The Shtei Kedusha same. And the reason why the Chachamim argue is, like we mentioned, Fakert. That's the whole Shitas Chachamim, that they don't view the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah as Shtei Kedushos, but they view it as Kedusha Achas. It's one continuum. It's considered 48 hours of rabbinic holiness. So once it's asad, it remains asad for the entirety 48 hours. Not like you, because Kedusha Achas. And now the third way of resolving the stira, the apparent stira between Rabbi Yehuda and Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda and Eruvin, Ravina b'reid Rav Ula Amar, that Hachem here, not on Mesechtes Beitzah, but in Mesechtes Eruvin, when Rabbi Yehuda is saying that if an egg is laid on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, you are allowed to eat it on the second day, meaning you may not eat it on the first day. There it's Bitarna Goyles, how a medis legadol Beitzim. There it came from a hen that was designated to lay eggs, not from a hen that was designated to be eaten. So there in Mesechtes Eruvin, this egg will be Noilad Muksa. And I'll go more than that. And now you appreciate, Rabbi Yehuda, how did we explain the Machlokes in our Mishnah? Why would we be lenient? We can only be lenient about the Beis Shammai. How can he say you can eat it? Is because he does not subscribe to this broader application of Muktzah. This is Rabbi Yehuda. Fakert Rabbi Yehuda is the one. Rabbi Yehuda Latame, the Islay Muktzah. Perfect, which is why he's going to be Machmer. The only reason why Rabbi Yehuda can say that the egg can be eaten on the second day is because, again, Rabbi Yehuda holds Rosh Hashanah Shtei Kedushos. Yes, it's Muktzah on Yom Tov. The second day Rosh Hashanah, Mimonavshach, either is Chol, or today is the holy day, so the egg wasn't even born on Yom Tov. So either way you look at it, you are allowed to eat the egg that was laid on the first day Rosh Hashanah. You can eat it, and you can handle it on the second day. And now, Chevre, Freilach, we're going back again to the 4 explanations in the Mishnah. Let's focus back on the Mishnah. Says the Gemara Meisvei. Now this Beitzah, we have to remember for the next year as well. The Beitzah is going to teach us 3 rules. And actually, as we will see, one rule almost contradicts the other. But let's begin with rule number 1. Says the Beitzah. Echad Beitzah shenolda b'Shabbos. Whether the egg was laid on Shabbos. Ve'echad Beitzah, or if you have an egg, shenolda b'Yom Tov. Says the Beitzah, Kishitas Beis Hillel. And here we're not focusing on the eating, we're focusing on the handling, on tiltul, on moving it. Ein metaltel and oisa, you may not move it. For loy lechasos boas hakeli, even if you're only moving it because you have a utensil and you want to cover that other utensil, so you want to move it for that keli, you want to cover the mouth of another utensil, not a justifiable reason. You want, as we know, that whenever you place an egg lengthwise, as we know as kids, it has so much koyach, it can hold something that's very, very heavy. Now what happens when you experiment is that the moment you don't place it exactly, perfectly in its length, then you're going to make a big balagan, you'll make a big mess. But if a person figures out never to have a bed, and the bed has 1 foot that's too low, so that's all they have, so they want to take a raw egg, and they're going to place it under one of the legs, and they know exactly how to place it, and you can't do that. Avol, however, says the Beitzah, koifa oleh esakli, you are allowed to take another non-muksa utensil and bring it to the location of this egg and turn it upside down, thus covering, thus protecting the egg, for the egg not to be broken. That you are allowed to do. Now here, Rashi reminds us that we had on Shabbos Daf Mem Gimel. We had again, we were learning about Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak has a very important rule, that ein kli nitel ela l'davar hanitel b'Shabbos, which means that if I have a cup that otherwise is not muktzah, but if the only reason why I want to handle it, I want to move it, is because it's going to be used to protect muktzah, that also may not be moved. So how does Rabbi Yitzchak understand, now that this Beitzah clearly opines with Beis Hillel, and the egg is muktzah, how are you allowed to be koifa olav esakli? So here Rashi reminds us that if you have a utensil and you picked it up, you picked it up because you need to use that place. In other words, it went into your hand beheteda. Once it's in your hand, now you can go and use it to cover the egg. And that's the general rule that we take a paskin by a muktzah, that once something that is muktzah is already in your hand, you don't have to drop it. You can put it down at your convenience. Okay, that is rule number one. Rule number two, let's break this Beitzah down. Clause number two, usfeika asura. That's huge. Now, what does usfeika mean? Obviously, as it will become clear, the havamina now is, the sfeika means you have a doubt whether it was laid on Shabbos or not. Whether it was laid on Yom Tov. You don't know whether this is the Beitzah Shenolda B'Yom Tov. Maybe it was laid a day before. So says the Beitzah, you know how strict we are with this egg, even sfeika is asura. Now we're going to have to revisit that. Guys, don't forget that we have this general rule, sfeika de'oraisa, l'chumra, if it's a doubt regarding a biblical law. Now, according to Rabbah, we said a Rabbah holds, hachana de Rabbah is a biblical law. I know that muktzah is a rabbinic law, but in this context, it's not fully consistent, but in this context, we're going to view muktzah as a quasi-biblical law. Biblical. So Rabbah, it's biblical. Hachana de Rabbah. The first sheet of Nachman, it's like doiraisa, sfeika doiraisa l'chumra. Problem will be from this clause, sfeika asura, both on Av Yosef and on Av Yitzchak, it's only a decree. Normally, by rabbinic doubts, we are lenient. We're going to get back to that. But let's first go to the third. And the third clause will make things more complicated. Another thing, if this egg got mixed into even another 1,000 eggs, so normally there is a concept of nullification. Biblically, if it's not an issue of a taste being permeated or absorbed taste, things are nullified in a majority. Sometimes you have to have a bittul in 60. Sometimes you have to have by truma 1 in 100. Right, we're learning now Rambam these days, if it's Orla, if it's Kilei HaKerem, you need to have a bittul of 200, but generally there is a certain point where the ratio of the permitted is that much more than the prohibited becomes nullified. Here the Beitzah is saying that this egg will never become prohibited. Now, before we go on, we have a very important Tosfos that's not directed here, but I'll speak it out over here. There's two ways of understanding this Beitzah. Rabbeinu Tam tells us how not to learn it. Sfeika asura, some understood that if you have a doubt, it's asur. And now, if this doubt got mixed into 1,000, the mixture is all asur. Rabbeinu Tam says that can't be. Because if, to begin with, the egg is doubtful whether it was laid on Yom Tov or not, and now it got mixed into other eggs, that's your classic sfeika. It's called a double doubt. And a sfeika, says that Rabbeinu Tam, even by biblical prohibitions, becomes nullified. So says the Rabbeinu Tam that the third case of the Beitzah, of an egg getting mixed in 1,000, that is not regarding the egg that you don't even know if it was laid on Yom Tov. No, that's a new case. That if you have an egg that's laid on Yom Tov, which is asur, that egg is never nullified. There's no bittul. If it gets mixed into 1,000, right, it's going to remain, and we have to understand why. Why is it not nullified? End of quote. But the focus now is not going to be on case number 1. It's not going to be on case number 3. It's going to be on case number 2. When the Beitzah says sfeika asura frekti gemara bishleim Rabba, that understands the problem with an egg that's laid on Yom Tov, as we call hachana de Rabba, the biblical obligation and thus the biblical prohibition of something that was not prepared, designated on a ordinary weekday prior for it to be consumed. If that did not happen, biblically you can't eat it. Oh, so therefore, if there's a doubt, have a sfeika doiraisa. And here we go. V'chol sfeika doiraisa, we are machmir, we are stringent. Ella, according, and the Gemara is not even mentioning the shita of Rav Nachman, like we spoke out, like all of the Mefarshim speak out. I know that muktzah is a derabanan, it's a very stringent derabanan, and we are machmir by a safek muktzah. So that's a known. Don't forget, we're learning Beitzah, Yontiv, we are expected to have learned already Masechta Shabbos. Ella, both according to Rav Yosef and what we introduced today, Rabbi Yitzchak, both of them have the same concept. It's a typical rabbinic decree. In other words, it's a rabbinic. So if there's a doubt of whether the egg was laid on Shabbos or whether the egg was laid on Yom Tov, well, that's a typical sfeika derabanan. And v'chol sfeika derabanan should only be lekula. We have to be lenient. Sfeika should not be asura. Sfeika should be muteres. Wow. So does this not refute 2 of the 4 approaches, answers the Gemara, you don't understand the Beitzah. When the Beitzah said, in case 2, Sfeika is not, you don't know whether it was late on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. No, it's another doubt. And that is, Seifa, second, is Asa'an L'Safek Treifa. Remember that from Chol and Chevra? If you have a fowl, if you have a bird, that is a Treifa. It's halachically Treifa. Everything that issues forth from that fowl is Treifa. If you know that the hen is a treifa, then the egg is asun midoiraisa, treifa. Case of sfeika is, you don't know whether it came from a hen, that's a treifa. This is a safek doiraisa. Safek doiraisa, safek doiraisa is lechumra. Problem is that this creates a problem with the third clause. You see like this. Until now, the Havamina was, Sfeika was about an egg that was laid on Yom Tov. We keep on saying, an egg that's laid on Yom Tov, Lebeis Hillel, Marmachmer, it's only asur for that day. The next day, that egg becomes permitted. And that's a classical example of davar sheyesh lo matirin. If something is prohibited now, but it will become permitted, there is a rule that such an item will never be nullified. It makes sense, because why would you have to lean or rely on nullification? Wait until tomorrow. And by the way, from here you see that nullification is like a b'diavad. It's not like a lachatchila, wait, get out of a doubt. So if we're learning pshat that the suffix is suffix, whether this egg was noilad, or whether, like the Rabbeinu Tam says, or the egg is, we're speaking about an egg, the problem of the egg is that it was laid on Yom Tiv, it makes sense that it will never be nullified, not even in 1,000. Wait until tomorrow. But now that you said, the second clause is speaking about a treifa issue will never become permitted. And similarly, if you have a doubt whether the egg came from a hen that was treifa or not, it's a suffix, but suffix deoraisa luchumra, that will never go away. So, where it says, Nesarva be'elef, kulam asurais, why? That the suffix in clause number 2 was about the egg that's laid. And what was the doubt? Suffix yontav, suffix choil. Now it makes sense, clause number 3, so therefore it won't be nullified because it's an item, it's an object that eventually will become permitted. Here the eventually is mamish the next day, but it wouldn't make a difference. It will become permitted. That's exactly the formulation of the statement of the sages, even in 1,000. Even though normally the highest level of nullification is 200. But that's like even in 1,000, like batal. It's a suffix treifa. If the issue is treifus, tarfus, davar sheyesh le matirani, davar she'ein le matirani, it's something that will never become permitted. And you know what the din should be? Guys, there's no mixture of tam. If there's no mixture with tam, it should be batal beroif, viti batal beruba. Bomba question. Now guys, remember this question, because God willing in the next year, which by the way we're going to learn Matzah Shabbos before Slichas, we're going to come back to this. We're not going to conclude this now. So says the Gemara, let me stand my ground. The Sfeika in the Beitzah is about Treifa. However, there is another rule regarding Bittul, and that is anything that is significant, anything that's chashuv, will also never be nullified. Now, what renders something halachically chashuv? Various things, including items that are sold by unit. The very fact that when you transact, they make a transaction with it, you don't sell it in bulk, you don't sell it by its weight, but every individual one, like let's go into eggs, even though eggs are not always sold as a individual unit, but they are in the most cases, they are typically sold by unit. So if you're going to say Beitzah is chashuva v'loy b'teilan, that's why it's not nullified in a mixture. Well, that is really subject to the argument that we'll be learn over here. This is so fundamental. Amar, that has the girsa, the version b'shitas Rab Meir that we'll learn in a moment. Kol shedarkei limani shaninu, that Rav Meir said that anything that's typically counted, even though it's not always counted, is always deemed halachically significant. It's considered chashuv. It's darkei. Normally you sell it by unit, which is the case of an egg. that would explain the Beitzah. So we're going to be good. We're speaking about the issue of treifa, safek de'araisa l'chumra. It's not batal because it's davar chashuv. But according to the shita that says that I know that if something is sold by unit, it's considered significant, but that's only if this is only exclusively sold as a unit. And that will not include eggs. Only es shedarkoi limonoi shaninu. The words of Rav Meir that we'll quote in a moment is that which is always sold as a unit, which will not include eggs. So we're stuck to the question. Okay, and now let's go ground zero. Where do we find this words es shedarkoi limnois or limonois? Kol shedarkoi limonois. The Tanan, guys, this is a Mishnah in Orlon. For those of us who are learning Rambam Amachaya. So here we go. If a person has a bundle of tilson in English is called fenugreek. If you don't see a picture of it, you don't know this, you don't know that. So let's go back to the Lashon HaKodesh. It's a certain type of bean. And the issue is that this bean is kilei hakerem, greens that were planted together with vines, become prohibited. Not only it may not be eaten, this mixture in a vineyard, shkoyach for the pictures, it also you may not even derive benefit. It's asur bahana. So that's the rule. You have a bundle, is yidluku, fabren, burn it, asur bahana. Now, what happens if it got mixed with other bundles? Nisarvu ba'acheros. And here we have the words that the Rabbeinu Tam removes, va'acheros ba'acheros. Because again, according to the Rabbeinu Tam, if this tilson got mixed with others, then any one of the others is already a doubt, suffix. If now one of those gets mixed with yet another group of bundles, that's your classical case of a double doubt of a sfek sfeika, and we hold that Rabbeinu Tam holds that a sfek sfeika, even by an isur doiraisa, even by kilei akedem, will affect nullification. So he takes out the avacheres ba'acheres. So be that as it may, says the Rav Meir kulam yidluku. Rav Meir holds that tilson is not nullified. Now the question is again, why not? Why not? Why not say, there's no mixture of taste, it should be batal b'roiv? Or, let me go better. Okay, Arla and Kilei Akedem, I take that back. They are only nullified. We learned that we make a kal v'chomer from Truma. From Truma we have a source from the Torah that it's nullified in 1 in 100. So there's a svara that if something is asur only b'achila, it's nullified in 1 in 100. Arla, Kilei Akedem, it needs 200 against 1. But it should be batal b'mosayim. And another detail, when it comes to items that are nullified, let's go to your classical case of kilei akedem. If one item that's kilei akedem gets mixed with similar 200 prohibited one, the permitted is 200, not 199. It's 200 to 1. It's nullified, but yalla, you have to take out 1. So at least you can say the one that was prohibited, I took out 1 bundle and everything else remains permitted. But Rav Meir does not allow this to be nullified. The question is why not? Because Rav Meir considers this tilson, this bundle of tilson, as a davar chashuv, as we'll see in a moment. And something that's chashuv, something that's significant, is not nullified. Now the chachamim hold, no. Yalu be'achas u'masayim. The word yalla means you have to remove 1, like we mentioned. It's nullified after you removed 1 if the ratio was 1 bundle of tilson, that is kilei akedem, got mixed into 200 or more bundles of tilson. That's not problematic. Just take out 1, and that's your classical bittul b'mosayim. That is the shita of the Chachamim. Now the Mishnah continues. We're reading the words of the Mishnah. Why would Rav Meir not say it's nullified? No, kilei akedem should be nullified in the ratio of 200 to 1. Shahoya Rav Meir Omer. Rav Meir always says. Now listen to the word here. This word is where we're going to have a machlokes. Es shedarkoi limnois. S means something that's always sold by its individual count as a single unit will never become nullified, and therefore here the word mekadesh is not to be understood in the positive. Mekadesh means it makes everything else unfit. We have to be removed from it, or it must be removed from us. And the Chachamim agreed to the concept that something that's considered significant is not nullified, but you know what they say? That Eina Mekadesh Elo Shisha Devarim Bilvad. Yeah, there are 6 items, and according to Rabbi Akiva, 7 items that are considered very significant. Very significant is not nullified. Stam significant will be nullified. And as it becomes clear in the Shita of the Chachamim / Rabbi Akiva, what makes something very significant? There are three criteria. Number one is it has to be something very large, begashmi, physically. Number two, it has to be something expensive. And number three, it has to be considered the most important, right, of its species. And here are the examples that even l'chachamim, they're very significant. What will that be? 6 or the 7. Egoize perech nuts. No, it's nuts. Mela. Perech nuts. Ooh, that's very chashiv. Rimoina baden. Pomegranates that grow in it. This is locations in the area called Baden. V'chaviyos sealed casks of wine. That's very chashiv. V'chilfei teradin, prickly beets. Nishtam borscht. Borscht, that is prickly. That's very significant. And number 5, v'kilchei keruv, cabbage stalks. We're speaking about large cabbages with their leaves. And number 6 is the dela'as yavanis, Greek gourd. Kevin is finding pictures on Machaya for all these foods. And Rabbi Akiva adds, what's number 7? Moisiv, afki kodesh balabais, homemade bread is considered something that's very chashuv, and if there is a problem with it, then it will never be nullified. And now, from these 6 or 7, the Mishnah just clarifies, haroya lo arla, not every item could be arla. Arla also needs to have a nullification of a ratio of 200 to 1. So the fruits of the 6, 7, so then that is what is the arla is referring to. Haroya lekili akedem, which are beets, which are cabbage, which are bread, then that will be lekili akedem. Nakuda. Okay, so now we have Rav Meir that has a broader application of a davar chashuv. And a davar chashuv is not nullified. What makes something significant? So the words that we have in the Mishnah and Arla is es shedarkoi limnois. And indeed, the itmar regarding that liner, we have a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Itmar Allah, Rabbi Yochanan says, that the words that you have to read is the way we read it before. Rav Meir says if something is exclusively sold by its unit, never sold in bulk, never, then it's considered chashuv. And by the way, that for sure, you should know that tilson is never sold by unit. It never sold by bulk. I think it's always sold by bundle. That's why it's not batal, because it's davar chashuv. What Rabbi Yochanan is trying to say, if you have an item that even if it's typically sold by individual unit, but if sometimes it's sold in bulk, it no longer will be considered halachically important, significant. Reish Lakish is the most stringent. In other words, Rav Lakish says that even kol shedarkei limonei shaninu, Rav Meir really said kol shedarkei limonei. So now the Gemara fears the question. So hanichal Rav Shimon ben Lakish, which is taka kol shedarkei limonei. That would explain the Beitzah. Guys, let's come back. We can learn pshat sfeikoi is treifa. Treifa's davar she'ein loy matirin. Why is it not batal echad be'elav? Because eggs, at least, is kol shedarkei limonei. Davar chashuv. But El Rabbi Yochanan ma'ikal meimar. That's the problem. Let's chaparayin answers the Gemara. It's not only Rav Meir. Rabbi Yochanan was telling you what Rabbi Meir holds. Rav Meir doesn't say everything is chashuv. It has to be eshadar kalimonis. But there are other tanoim, like we will see. Let's see how far we can get. There are other tanoim that clearly subscribe that if something is sometimes sold as an individual unit, that is enough for it to be deemed important or significant, or the word is chashuv, and it will not be nullified. So the Beitzah will not be Rav Meir, it will be those tanoim. Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Papa, Hai Tana. Is Tana the liter k'tziyosi. The Tana of the Beitzah, we're learning pshat, it's treifa, will be like the Tana that we have in the Mishnah regarding the litra katsias, regarding the litra, let's go, it's a quantity. Rashi holds it's the quantity of a loig. We're speaking about a katsiya is dried figs. It was very common that after figs were harvested, they were first dried. Then there was a maktsoya. Maktsoya was the instrument that they would use to get rid of the stem that you want to get rid of, and it would also cut it open, and it would press it, and then they would put all of these pressed figs into a large round form. They would make like this cake, like this round cake of pressed figs, and in the marketplace they would cut off certain amounts and they would sell it. Now, the Mishnah writes like this: the Amar, we learned from that Tana, like we'll see in a moment, that kol davar shebeminyan. Kol davar shebeminyan means if something is even only sometimes sold by unit. Not only do you not need for it to be exclusively sold by unit, we don't even need for it to be in the majority or typically sold by unit. If it's sometimes sold by unit, even if the problem is only of rabbinic nature, that's Tefilla midrabanan, still it's already considered a davar chashuv and thus loy batil. And if that's the case by even a rabbinic law, coming back to our Beitzah, we're standing the ground, we're going to change that, we're going to have another approach, God willing, in the next year, that the Beitzah is speaking about a suffix treifa. We're not speaking about a suffix whether it was late on Yontif. So that's a suffix doiraisa. So kolchchen b'doiraisa, even though eggs are sometimes sold in bulk, but since they are not in the majority typically sold by unit, right, a dozen eggs, half a dozen eggs, v'chulei, it will not be nullified. Now, where do we have this Tanach? Where do we have this Tanach? I know we have to Chaparain. I think it's a long hemshech. I think we'll stop over here, and we're going to recap where we're afterwards. So we're leaving off 3 lines before the bottom of the Amit. Mamash, we're going to learn a case. There we're speaking about the suffix, whether those figs were tithed or not. And don't forget, Chevra, that according to most Rishonim and the way we will learn this whole topic, that midoiraisa, 5 grains have to be tithed, according to most other Rishonim, and olives and grapes. Everything else, including figs, biblically does not need to be tithed. So the whole issue that we will be learning, whether there was figs that were not tithed, and they got pressed into a mold with figs that were tithed. The whole issue is whether it's nullified or not. The whole issue is a derabanan, and we're going to learn really. There's a 2-way machlokes. I'm just delaying it just to give a heads up. There's a 2-way machlokes, but tanoim, and then there is a machlokes tanoim. What that machlokes is. So we're going to learn various opinions, and we will see that there are some who understood that there is a Tana that's very easily gives the title chashuv. Even if it's sometimes sold as a unit, bist chashiv, and therefore afilu be'elef lebatel, God willing, to be continued.